Hello and a warm welcome to Federal Special Program Capital Beat. US Supreme Court on Friday struck down President Donald Trump's sweeping global tariffs, dealing him a major setback. Now, in response, Donald Trump said that he was absolutely ashamed of some justices who ruled 6-3 against him, calling them disloyal to our constitution and lapdogs. These are the words he used while he was addressing the press. Now, after the ruling, Trump also signed an executive order on Friday to impose a 10% worldwide tariff on foreign goods. He signed the order in the Oval Office and later wrote on social media that it was effective almost immediately. Now, during that press conference, there was an ANI reporter who asked Donald Trump some India specific questions that what does the deal now look like with India? I want you to listen to what Donald Trump said when it came to the India specific question. Let's play out that bite for the viewers.
We are doing the various investigations necessary to put fair tariffs or tariffs, period, on other countries. So we're doing that, period. But we're immediately instituting the 10% provision, which we're allowed to do. And in the end, I think we'll take in more money than we've taken in.
No, I think, Abhirami, you are there at the backstage. I think that was not the bite. The ANI reporter asked him a specific question to which he said that nothing changes as far as India is concerned. And he very categorically said that we have signed a deal already with India. So basically, he's saying that nothing changes for India, which means that whatever India had committed, he said that 18%, what he meant was that nothing is going to change. That means what we assume is that whatever the trade deal framework has been worked around with 18% tariff, now with 10% extra taxes levied, the global worldwide tax which he has imposed on all the countries, where does it leave India to? What are the options before India? That is what everyone is asking. If you have that bite ready, Abhirami, later, you can play it, or just give me a cue, you can play that. But there's a lot of political reaction also. Congress has reacted to it. I'd like to play out the tweet of Rahul Gandhi, what he said this morning. He put out a tweet. Can we have Rahul Gandhi's tweet also? So this is what he said, that the PM is compromised. His betrayal now stands exposed. He can't renegotiate. He will surrender further. So that brings us to the question that, is India really going to renegotiate? What happens to the tariffs? Is India going to be slapped with 28% tariff, which is 18% of the earlier slab and 10% more? So what are the diplomatic options also before India? That's also a question which everybody needs to answer. And just a short while back, Union Minister Prahlad Joshi was facing some reporters who asked him a question and asked for his reaction. So he said that that's not in his domain, and the trade deal is being dealt with the Commerce Ministry and the MEA. So far, we haven't seen any reaction by the MEA, whereas few countries have reacted to it. Joining me this evening is former Ambassador Meera Shankar. Ma'am, thank you so much for joining. And after this huge verdict on the tariffs, what do you think? How does it work out for India? What are the options before India? What can we look forward to?
Well, according to me, the Supreme Court judgment means that as of now, we go back to the MFN tariffs under the WTO, which were an average of 3% US tariffs. President Trump has imposed 10% tariffs under Section 122 of the US Trade Act, which will be in addition to the MFN tariffs. I don't think that the tariffs that have been negotiated, we don't know if they will continue. As far as India is concerned, we haven't yet signed even the interim deal. What we had was a framework, an understanding on a framework, which has still to be fleshed out into an actual agreement. So I would say that for India, it would be important to wait and watch. We needn't be in a hurry to conclude the deal. I think our trade team is there in Washington right now. It would be important for them to come back and consult with legal experts here and in the US, and of course with the political leadership on how this is going to impact the way forward. So I think waiting and watching and seeing what the US is doing is probably the best policy right now, because we don't know. The thing is that the US can use other provisions of its trade law to impose tariffs, because what the Supreme Court has said is that Trump has exceeded his authority under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act. That is the act under which Trump had imposed all his reciprocal tariffs. So now Trump and his team have been looking at other provisions of US trade law under which they could impose tariffs, including this 122, including 301, and including 232. So these are different provisions. But as I said, these, like under 122, I think there's a limit. He can't impose more than 15% tariff. And
No, but
also
what you said, ma'am.
there's a
Right,
time limit which applies. It's only for 150 days that those
right.
tariffs can be imposed. Similarly, under Section 301, there has to be first an investigation which comes up with the conclusion that there is unfair trade being indulged in by one of the US's trade partners, and so on. So there are procedures, processes, etc., which have to be complied with. It's not something where through executive authority straight away you can impose tariffs. And then you will have the midterms, which will take place in November. And we have to see what the result of that will be. So right now, I think we need to wait and watch how Trump plans to play this.
I'll try and play out that bite of Donald Trump, but ma'am, he very clearly says that India will pay the tariffs and we will not pay the tariffs. We made a flip. This is what he said. We'll try and play out that bite if it is ready. And this is what opposition in
Gentleman, a great
the country
man,
is latching onto. I
actually.
think this bite is ready.
But
Let's
he
listen.
was much smarter than the people. Prime Minister Modi is a great gentleman, a great man, actually. But he was much smarter than the people that he was against in terms of the United States. He was ripping us off in India. So we made a deal with India, and it's a fair deal now. And we are not paying tariffs to them, and they are paying tariffs. We did a little flip.
So he says we did a flip. We are not paying the tariffs. They will pay the tariffs. Now, this is immediately after the verdict came out, and in the press conference to an India specific question, he said this. So this is something, ma'am, if you could explain, what does he actually mean? Or is it just a political rhetoric?
I think he's going by the framework which, was negotiated, or at least is not yet final, but was the broad understanding within which the interim arrangement was being finalized. And that quite clearly specified that India will pay 18% tariff. I mean, there will be 18% tariff on Indian exports, and India will reduce its duties on the import of US industrial products substantively and preferably to zero. So it is reflecting what that understanding was. Now that the Supreme Court has held these tariffs to be, not valid because they exceeded the legal authority that the president had under that act. Trump is taking it that it automatically continues and the deal will be concluded. But I think for India, it's important to consider the implications and to wait and watch what course the US
No, but
takes.
this is exactly what the Indian side is saying, that apparently the MEA or the Commerce Ministry, after reading the verdict, after analyzing the verdict, they will probably brief the press. But the question is, ma'am, that about the verdict. BBC, CNN, all the think tanks, they kept on talking for the last 4 or 5 months that what if, and they were hinting that that the verdict could upend the entire tariff process of Donald Trump. They went on hinting at that. Now, didn't India grab this hint or the signal? And they could have waited. This is what the opposition is saying, that 2nd February is the time when they sealed the deal. They said that the joint statement on the trade deal framework also came out. But couldn't they have waited for another 18 days? What was a hurry? And this is what the opposition is talking about. So did India act in haste when it comes to this particular deal?
Well, I think we held out for perhaps the longest, other than China. In terms of other countries, they negotiated very quickly asymmetrical deals with the United States, where they would give, like Vietnam, zero duty access to the US, and they would pay, 19% or 20% duty. India held out for quite long, and it's true that most of the betting with regard to the likely US Supreme Court verdict was that the verdict would probably overturn or, hold that Trump had exceeded his legal authority under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, because the Constitution basically, as I said, provides the Congress with the authority to impose taxes, tariffs, etc. All financial appropriations basically are done through the Congress. That's the balance of power. The president has more leeway in foreign policy than in domestic economic policy, and he needs the legislative support of the Congress. But, at many points in time, in fact, I think at one point it was almost like people were speculating that the judgment is going to come today, the judgment is going to come today. And most of the betting was 70% that the Supreme Court would overturn it. But then the judgment didn't come. At various points, it appeared that the court was going to opine. And the kind of questions they were asking, the kind of remarks they were making during the hearing, made it clear that they were inclined to see this as a breach of constitutional norms and authority. So most assessments were that it would be in favor of overturning the tariffs imposed under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, but there was no certainty about the timing within which that judgment was likely to come. And at various points, it appeared that the judgment was imminent, but it didn't come. So I suppose, you can always kind of think that maybe the judgment is going to be delayed or something.
Right.
Because I think twice before it appeared that a judgment was likely and it got delayed.
No, but this, this entire narrative of how we've surrendered, we've given away too many concessions of to America. Now, does this verdict give more leveraging power to India, more power or more scope, or rather a wider ambit to renegotiate? Now, when it comes to renegotiation, say for example, now that the legal basis of this entire tariffs has disappeared after the verdict. So, can now India insist on Donald Trump that, look, we will pay the older tariffs? Can they insist upon now?
Well, it certainly provides space for it, but politically it becomes more difficult if you have reached some kind of understanding. But
Okay.
clearly, the whole legal basis, since the deal has not been finalized, Since we do not have even the text of an agreed interim trade deal, I think basically right now we need to just say that we are taking stock of the new situation and we need consultations. Our team needs to consult with legal experts, with you know our leadership, to see how this impacts or to understand the implications of this judgment. Also, see how other countries are responding, the ones who actually worked out trade deals with the US in the past. So I think it's a moment to really pause right now.
Right. So you're saying it's a moment to pause. But apart from that, do you think that the option of going to WTO also exists with India? I mean, in the extreme circumstances, if things don't work around for India, if Trump remains to be very insistent and obstinate, like he always does, and we got an evidence of that immediately after the verdict. He held a press conference and he again said what he had to. So, does India also have the option of going back to WTO and challenging what Donald Trump is saying with vis-a-vis India?
Look, I think that the WTO dispute settlement mechanism has been virtually, non-functional, because the US has not allowed nominations of experts to the dispute settlement mechanism to be, finalized. So vacancies are there. The US has blocked appointments. So the dispute settlement mechanism in the WTO is really non-functional. Now, collectively, if a large number of countries decide to challenge the US decision, then it's one thing. I think India, if I'm not mistaken, had moved something at the WTO, but I don't know what relief you're going to get from there
Yes.
at the
No,
end
and
of the day.
we are not even sure, like what you said, that if there are other countries who are joining the WTO, will India join? That's also a question, ma'am, because we do not know what were the compelling factors behind inking this deal or behind, coming out with a joint statement. We don't know the terms and references; they are not very clear. So, what if do you think that India? I mean, it's quite evident as it looks that India does have a scope for renegotiation, but how much room does it actually have to renegotiate? Looking at the things, how diplomatic things are happening, looking at how politically this entire thing is viewed, how much room does India has?
I think we have to wait and watch what the US does and then see what our options are. Because right now we don't know, what kind of move the US is going to make. With regard to their plan B, this is what they said, Trump's team, that they have a plan B if the Supreme Court rules against them. And they are trying to activate it. I mean, Trump has already imposed 10% universal tariff under Section 122. They will look at other sections. As I said, under Section 122, there's a ceiling of 15% tariff which can be imposed. And there's also a time limit within which the tariff has to be removed. You can't take it beyond that. Similarly, under Section 301 of the Trade Act, where they investigate unfair trade practices by other countries, they have to specify where the unfair trade practice is taking place. There has to be an investigation. That investigation has to come to the conclusion that there has been discriminatory trade or unfair trade by a country. And then, some tariff penalties can be levied. For instance, at one stage, the US had withdrawn GSP for our pharmaceutical exports to the US on grounds of our intellectual property law. But it was not across the board. It was with regard to certain sectors where it was seen as being, India was not adhering to whatever were the international norms or whatever. The other provisions of US law have limitations in terms of actually imposing such a broad based and such a huge tariff.
But, ma'am, like what you said in your initial submission, that as of now, the first look of it says that if there is no legal basis now to the Trump's tariffs, so India automatically goes back to the MFN status and to the original 3 to 4% tariffs, which were earlier there, the original tariff mechanism.
Yeah, plus
So
10%, plus
just 10%.
10%.
Yes,
Yeah.
plus 10%.
But
So
that is universal. He's
that is
put it on
universal.
all countries. Yeah.
Right, but but surely there is some lack of clarity right now vis-a-vis India, because whatever decisions have taken place recently, as far as the joint statement is concerned. So, and I'm just going by what Donald Trump said yesterday, that nothing changes. India will pay tariffs, and we are not paying the tariffs. And Modi was trying to be over smart. He said things like that. So does it go to show the very statement? I'm just going by the statement. Does that statement show that 18% tariffs will remain and it's going to be 18 plus 10?
But he has to find a legal basis for that, no? The
Right,
legal basis under which he imposed the, you know,
right.
25% tariffs, not 18. 18 is under the new arrangement, and
Yeah.
that is still being finalized. So,
Hmm.
the legal basis of the 25% tariffs that he imposed, the reciprocal tariffs, that legal basis is no longer valid. So, those tariffs, according to normal understanding of law and judgments, would be that those tariffs are no longer valid and you revert to the status quo ante. That is the MFN tariff, which was there before the reciprocal tariffs were finalized. Unless you actually work out a bilateral agreement with the US, which as of now we have not done. We have some understanding, there is a joint statement, but it's what is
No,
called a
but
framework.
this understanding won't be taken as a bilateral understanding. Now, what were the compelling factors? What were the reasons? Nobody knows. But there certainly seems to be an understanding, because back home, when the deal got finalized, even Prime Minister Modi that day looked very happy, and it just seemed that everything is perfect now. And in fact, the opposition that day raised this issue also, that with 18% tariff, also we are in a celebratory mood. So, what I'm wanting to understand from you is that, does this verdict come as a win-win for India? Like what you said, that India has to pause, it has to wait and watch now, it doesn't have an option. But does it look like a win-win situation for India at the moment?
Look, the US Supreme Court verdict certainly improves the situation for India
Okay.
because it gives you more space
Hmm.
in terms of the legality of what Trump has been doing through executive order. But
Hmm.
it doesn't rule out the possibility that Trump may try to impose similar tariffs through other mechanisms or through other legal provisions available under US trade law. Now, how are other countries also going to respond? Those like UK, Europe, others, Vietnam, Indonesia, Bangladesh, who have signed agreements or who have reached agreements with the US. How are they going to respond? Will the US be able to bulldoze its way into having them continue the tariffs on a bilateral agreement basis without the legal imprimatur of the Supreme Court? Will Trump pursue the possibility of getting these tariffs approved through the Congress? In which case, then they can't be challenged because Congress has the authority and he has a majority in both the Senate and the House. But there will be, individual dissent, even from within the Republican Party. And there will be discussions, there will be a whole process which will have to be gone through. And so it's not something which will be like where he can snap his fingers and immediately impose the same kind of tariffs. So, as I said, the best course for India at this juncture is to pause and see what our options are in the light of how the US is going to respond to the Supreme Court judgment, other than the 10% tariffs that Trump has already announced, and B, how other countries are going to interpret this judgment and its impact on their bilateral understandings.
But, ma'am, I was also reading somewhere that apart from this 10% global tariff, which is going to be imposed on all the countries worldwide, Trump was also talking about an embargo which he can impose. Now, is that another option or a tool which Trump can exercise apart from this Section 122 global tariff which he has announced? Which are the other options? Because I saw JD Vance also saying the same thing, that there are other mechanisms. Now, which are the other mechanisms which they can exercise at this point of time?
Look, one is, as I said, the 301, Section 301 of the US Trade Act, which allows them to impose tariffs if there is a finding that a country is using discriminatory trade practices against US goods and preventing them from entering its market. So that is one section. Then 232 is also there, where you can talk about, injury to US domestic industry. But again, these are limited. The tariff can be only for a certain time frame. And under 122, the highest that can be, which gives the biggest leeway. 122 is the section on grounds of national security, which gives the biggest leeway to Trump. But even there, the ceiling is 15%. He can't impose more than 15%. So there are, I don't know about embargoes. They have, whether you can embargo trade from a whole country. These are all things, which they are looking at. The US team is looking at these possibilities because they feel a major plank of Trump's platform has been undone by the US Supreme Court judgment. And the interesting thing is that it is a court which has a conservative majority, and the judgment has been passed 6-3. So 6 justices have supported the judgment. There were 3 dissenting voices. And it shows that, the legality of what Trump was doing was clearly in question.
Okay. Right. But my last question to you before I wind up the interview now, that, I mean, can we expect India to do some hard talking now that they have the legal recourse, and they do see this, that, the legal basis of the tariffs is entirely gone now. So Trump is on a weak footing. It's like a setback politically, diplomatically, and every country in the world knows at this point of time so how weak Trump is. No matter how much he may flex his muscles and say that no, we have other options. So can India have an upper edge now when it deals with Donald Trump? Because so far what we saw was that it almost looked like that, we are agreeing to whatever Trump is saying. Now can India have an upper hand while they are dealing with Donald Trump or America?
Look, I think there are power asymmetries in the economic field between India and the United States, and those power asymmetries will continue. So when you negotiate, you have to keep in mind relative strengths, but certainly it gives you more space. And right now, there's no need for us to rush into deal making. I think let's wait and watch.
All right, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining on the Federal. Thank you.